And here we are, episode 57.
Yes. Well, I would ask how are you doing, but it seems like a lot's been happening in the world of Australia as well as Canada, right?
It absolutely has. So, within the last week, there's been, I've actually voted in two different national elections. So, I voted in the Canadian election, which I postal voted. And so, I actually voted several weeks ago, but my vote was counted on the 28th. And I voted in the Australian election yesterday. So, it's actually kind of interesting, actually. For a start, it's kind of bit strange that the two elections happen to land right near each other, but there are actually some similarities between the two elections as well. So in both cases, the Conservative Party was tipped to win and was really looking like they were going to win, say, a few months ago, even up to a month or two ago before. And their support declined in the weeks before the election, and in both cases, the centre-left party ended up getting elected. So in Canada, that's the Canadian Liberals who were elected with
Mhm.
Mark Carney
Yep.
and as the Prime Minister. And in Australia, the Australian Labor Party. In fact, in both cases, they were returned actually. So, and in Australia, the Australian Labor Party was elected. But there's a few other similarities. It's all a bit strange too, the way it's worked out. Uh, in both cases, party leaders lost their seats. So, for Americans that may not be aware of how our system works, it's we copied our system mostly off the British, but in the case of Australia, a little bit off the Americans as well. So it's called the Westminster system. We do not have a president, obviously. The head of state is actually the monarch, King Charles III, in the case of 15 countries, including the United Kingdom, Jamaica, I think the Bahamas, various other countries in the Caribbean, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Yeah. Anyway, so there's 15 at last count. One there was 16, but one of them became a republic. So there you go. Um, and it's actually a bit of a strange arrangement before I get onto the election. They all actually share a monarch. So Charles III is actually the King of Australia. He's certainly not the King of England, as you hear people say, or with Elizabeth, they would talk about the Queen of England, because there hasn't been a King or a Queen of England for many hundreds of years. Charles is the King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but he's also the King of Canada and the King of Australia and the King of New Zealand, etc. And those are all separate roles. So one of the oddities of this situation is if somehow the United Kingdom were to become a republic tomorrow, Charles would not stop being king. He would still be the King of Canada and he would still be the King of Australia and so forth. It would take each individual country to break that connection to the crown, as it were.
I see.
There's all sorts of weird things that come out of this. Like the Australian government has determined that the king is not an Australian citizen, but has an absolute right to enter and remain in Australia. Whereas I think the Canadian government argued that the monarch is a Canadian citizen by virtue of
Hmm.
the role. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, you've got this quite strange arrangement, and there's this really ancient term called personal union. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It used to be used. You'd hear it a lot in Middle Ages or even in early modern era. For example, the United Kingdom and the Kingdom, I think Duchy of Hanover were in personal union at one point. That means they share a monarch, but don't have any other connection. And countries that are in personal union, they usually get on pretty well. It's this sort of strange arrangement because they share the monarch, even though they're not legally connected. They tend to coordinate their activities. They tend to be fairly friendly and back each other up on the world stage. Anyway, so yeah, the 15 Commonwealth realms are all said to be in personal union, which is I find strange because that's, as I said, a term that you'd normally associate with, the 18th century or something like that. That's the arrangement we have. So anyway. Yes, so the what I was getting back to the elections, a few strange things happened. So in the Canadian election, there was, as I said, a swing towards the centre-left party, the Liberals. But what interestingly happened is that the Conservative Party didn't actually lose that many seats. Oh yes, so that's what I was talking a little bit about the election, wasn't I? About how our political system works. So in the Westminster system, we have usually two houses of parliament. The government is formed in the lower house of parliament. So in the UK, this is called the House of Commons. In Australia, it's the House of Representatives, and in Canada, it's the House of Commons as well. So this sort of evolved over hundreds and hundreds of years in the UK, and to the end of the situation where it started out with the monarch being powerful, and then the lords became more powerful, and finally the commons, not the commoners, but the commons became powerful, and the lords and the monarch eventually lost power. And of course, new countries were established, and so we pretty much copied the system. So that's why we have the same bicameral system, two houses of parliament. In Australia, there's the House of Representatives, which is where the government is formed, and an upper house is called the Senate. And in Canada, we have the House of Commons, and the upper house is also called the Senate. But in Australia, the Senate is elected, whereas in Canada, the senators are appointed by the Prime Minister. So there are a few differences, and the Australian Senate is also elected. And if this sounds familiar, it's because we actually copied the homework of the Americans. So the United States Constitution actually influenced the Australian Constitution, and they actually had several copies of the U.S. Constitution at the constitutional conventions in the late 19th century, which is why our upper house is called a Senate. It's why they're elected. It's why each state has an equal number of senators. I'm sure that starts to sound pretty familiar. Yeah.
Yes.
So, yes. So anyway, getting back to the election, the Liberals in Canada. One last thing I wanted to mention about our system. Obviously, the power rests with the Prime Minister, who is the leader of the government in the lower house, and that's true in all Westminster systems. Uh, anyway, in Canada, the Liberals they kept government because they actually were the government before. They kept government, but the Conservatives in Canada did not lose many seats. They did lose a few, but the leader of the opposition, who was the head of the Conservative Party, lost his seat. And that is quite unusual. But something else interesting happened. There's a third party in Canada. There's the Conservatives, the Liberals, and you can guess where the Conservatives are. The Liberals are sort of centre left and leaning a bit left in recent years, but they might be coming back a little bit. I'll get back to that. And there's a third party called the New Democratic Party, that was normally just the NDP, and they are more to the left, and they're the wokest of the three parties, by and far the wokest. But in order to prevent the Conservative Party winning in this election, many people who would ordinarily vote for the NDP abandoned the NDP and voted Liberal to try to shore up a Liberal victory, essentially. And this caused the NDP to collapse as a political party. And what that means for the future of Canadian politics, it isn't quite clear because they've actually dropped below an important threshold. In Canada, you have to have 8 seats in Parliament to even be an official party, and the NDP only has 7 now. So they're actually technically not an official party anymore.
Mhm.
So they're not quite. So yeah, this is kind of quite concerning for what was the third party in Canada. Um, anyway, in Australia, something similar happened as well. So the Australian Labor Party, which is the centre left party, that again there were a lot of parallels. Again, had been moving to the left rather over the last few years and being more woke, but had come back a little bit as they'd realised that they were pissing people off and so forth. So and there'd been an event that happened in Australia about 18 months earlier, which I may not necessarily get into another political vote. And that sent a real message to the Labor Party that perhaps they were pushing it too far with the woke, and they wound it back a bit. Anyway, so yeah, it looked like they were going to lose the election, but they were actually returned yesterday with a significant increase in the number of seats. So much so that even they didn't think they were going to get that many seats. They thought they were going to win. That was sort of the assessment, but they thought it'd be a narrow win. No, it is a significant win. But I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, but what's really interesting is another parallel with Canada. The leader of the opposition lost his seat in the Australian election as well. So we've got this strange parallels occurring between Canada and Australia at the moment. And anyway, so one thing that sort of does concern me a little bit, though, is that the shift to the Australian Labor Party in this election wasn't nearly as significant as you're hearing from the media. The number of seats they got was quite significant. I think, well, they still haven't finished counting because it was only yesterday, but it's looking like at least 88 seats out of the 150 seats in the House of Representatives. And now I'm throwing a lot of stuff in. But when I analysed the data, which I've done mainly today, it was quite late last night. I started a little bit late last night and then did most of it today. Uh, the shift is only about 3%. About 3% of people changed their vote, and to the Australian Labor Party. And what's happened is many people in the media are talking about this sort of landslide of lots of people voting for the Labor Party, but it's not really the case. Only about 3% of people, as I said, changed their vote. Uh, but it's reflected in a much larger number of votes. And what really is worrying me is the Labor Party themselves seem to be taking this on. Now, admittedly, it's only day one, but
Mhm.
hopefully cooler heads will prevail. But it seems like they're being a little bit, they're basking in their own glory at the moment a little bit and just possibly believing their own press a little bit too much. So
Right.
hopefully, yeah, so hopefully we don't sort of end up with this arrogant government who starts to try to reimpose, woke principles and so forth. So. But it's possible. But anyway, so uh, yeah, so essentially, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, so I did a bit of an analysis too, and I found that there was actually an election about 12 years ago in which the other side of politics did about as well as the Labor Party has this time, and it was
Mhm.
completely different. They didn't proclaim how great they were. The media didn't push this narrative that it's a landslide victory and so forth. Yes, it was a good victory, and this one is a good victory as well. But it was much more measured when the Conservatives, which in Australia, by the way, are called the Liberal Party, uh,
Yes.
were the ones who won. Whereas this time with the Labor Party, you've got the media saying it's a mandate for change and all sorts of things, which is nonsense. It isn't because it's only been a 3% change in the percentage of the people who voted. Anyway, so I did go through quite a lot of material there, but the main thing is I think we've got to really watch this in over the next few months to see if they don't assume that because of this large number of seats they've won, that they're not going to try to push through a woke agenda again. So this will be something that I'll be keeping a very close eye on.
Right.
I've actually got a better feeling about Canada. Mark Carney, who's taken over in Canada, I think he's a bit of a smart cookie, and I think he's realised that they were pushing the work too hard, and I think he's really going to continue rolling it back. That's my prediction. Hopefully, I'm right, but I'll keep you informed.
Okay. Well, one thing I was kind of noticing from the Australian side of the groups you follow and so forth, is that they that Australia has voted for hyperinflation, and so forth. So there were a lot of complaints from an economic standpoint, to be sure. So I mean, this seemed like a big deal. From what I'm seeing, I could see that they're taking it as a big deal.
Well, the inflation rate's down again now. So it did rise after COVID in the years afterwards, and it got quite high since Australia, like the US and a lot of other countries, did have high inflation. I think in the 70s. The inflation rate has remained relatively low, especially since the 80s. There were some economic reforms that happened in the 80s, and since then it's been quite good. That's when they got rid of trade tariffs and they liberalised trade and so forth. And since then, the inflation rates remain relatively low. It did peak, I think, about 5% in a couple of years ago, but it's down to about 2.2 or something, I think now. So it's generally not too bad. Um, Interest rates tend to be higher here than other developed countries. I've often put that down to the fact that the government here tends to be a little bit more hands off, and I think they actually want that because it encourages foreign investment. So quite a lot of people will invest in Australia simply because the interest rates are higher. But I'm not an economist. That's always been my sense, though.
Okay. Gotcha. Right. Also, what's more, when I'm just looking at the Canadian election, because I thought I was going to bring up just the Canadian election today too, but then the Australian election happened. Um, One thing the the sense I got, and I kind of heard this from Hannah from Honey Badger Radio when she was doing one of her shows, that I think that the conservative side was too overconfident. I think they figured this was a shoe-in, but as it turns out, the conservative guy, I don't even remember the guy's name.
Pierre
Um,
Polyev, I believe it's pronounced. Pierre
okay,
Polyev.
Right. He didn't speak to people. He didn't do any of the work. I think that's the way it was put, and kind of handed the victory to Carney, and it kind of went to the Trump's a mean person sort of a kind of a route towards the tail end of that, I think. So it kind of screwed himself over. Right? Is the impression I got.
Even a couple of months before, it was really looking like it was an easy Conservative victory. So yeah, the Conservative Party probably didn't think they had to put too much effort in.
Yeah,
And
well,
to a certain extent, that's probably true of the Conservative Party in Australia as well, actually, because it was looking very similar. And I think in both cases they pretty much admitted they didn't run a very good campaign. So. So that's probably all I've got to say on the elections. I do think it's kind of interesting the number of parallels, including both leaders of the Conservative Party losing their own seats, which is an extraordinarily unusual thing. And in fact, in Australia, it's actually the first time it's happened that no leader of the opposition has ever lost their seat in an election before. Twice before in Australia, the prime ministers have lost their seat, and I think that's happened in Canada as well. But yeah, this time, so that was quite. So it is quite an unusual thing to happen, and in fact, we've got three party leaders across the two countries that lost their seats in the most recent elections.
okay.
So that's all I have on elections, really. The next thing I have is Great Men of History, but I don't know if you've anything you want to talk about first.
Well, let's do kind of like a back and forth. So, before we get to Great Men of History, so I had the pleasure of participating in a Magic draft this past Friday. Drafting is such a fun format, or way to play Magic that, and it's especially really good with the fact that the last set, Tarkir Dragonstorm, is actually one of the better sets,
Oh,
not only this past year, but for a while, I think. I think this has been the most exciting playing experience for a while. It does feel more like Magic instead of the strange directions that Magic's kind of gone to story-wise and theme-wise and so forth. So for those that don't know what a draft is, basically we sit in a pod and pass around packs of Magic, pick a card, pass it to the next guy, pick a card, pass it to the next guy, and do it for about three or so packs, and then build a small deck with it. And so the first card I actually ended up drafting was something called Ureni the Song Unending. And so this is a 10/10 creature, spirit dragon, legendary, flying, protection from white and from black. When Urani enters, so I'm trying to get, so as an old Magic player, I'm trying to get your
yeah,
reaction to the,
exactly. I'm listening.
yeah,
I'm listening to this,
right.
and then I'll react.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. When Urani enters, it deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers your opponents control, where X is the number of lands you control. So it costs 8 mana, by the way. So five green, blue, red, right? So you think this would be a bit of an expensive card to cast, right?
Right. So
But
my first reaction is that that's a very powerful card by my standards.
by your
Okay.
standards, for sure,
Yes,
yes.
exactly. Because having played Magic in the past, and I'm thinking, wow, what's the casting cost on that? Across three colors, that partially offsets the cost because that is more difficult to do. But that is nevertheless a very, very powerful card.
Mhm.
Yeah, you wouldn't have seen anything like that in the early decks at all.
In the
How
early
does that
decks,
compare?
no, but
No,
the past few sets are monstrously worse than that card in terms of
really.
value and like cost reduction and so forth. Power creep has been crazy, but
Yeah,
this is
I've
still a
heard that.
decent card for what it is. It
Yeah,
still fetches a couple dollars,
yeah.
what I've seen. So,
I've heard that power creep is quite an issue,
right,
and I
sure,
mean,
yeah,
Magic's been around for decades now, so it
right,
must have had
sure.
plenty of time to occur.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
sure, yeah. So this is decent, but not even like the worst thing ever right now. But still,
That
it was a toss up between a skirmish rhino and this thing. I kind of went, so I decided to commit to the teamer strategy, which is their way of saying blue, red, and green. So
right.
and okay, so um, I actually I actually ended up w winning 2 out of 3 games.
Oh, well
It
done.
was a best of one, so we didn't do like full Swiss matches. But and I went second place out of 9, which was exciting. Um, I
Do you want
went
to
with
explain? Do you want to explain Swiss draw?
so we're talking about best of three, right? Yeah.
Wasn't there also something in Swiss draw that they balanced players by score? When we did that, they
There is a
would.
scoring aspect involved. I
Yeah.
just I've never figured out the particulars of the percentages and so forth. But we didn't do a Swiss draw this time. We did just best of one. So
Right, cool.
okay. Now I went with a 50 card deck instead of a 40 card deck this time around because of the special rules for this draft, right? So the extra rule is you start off with an emblem that says uh during your draw steps, draw an additional card, and you get to play an additional land per turn. So instead of the usual 40, I went with 50. I went with
Filled with land.
21 lands instead of far less.
Yeah.
And every time I rolled a die to see who would choose to go first, I always won the die roll, right? But I always went second because I will get two cards when I take my first
Ah,
turn.
right. You mean
Right.
you elected to go second?
Exactly.
Right.
This is a very rare situation in which I did that. And
Right.
right. So there's that. The third game, I actually cast Rennie and actually did a total of 8 damage spread around his creatures and practically wiped his board. And I was able to kind of win in the next turn and so forth. Because putting down lands was easy. You could, I figured you would go through your deck easier, so I went with more cards than 40, and it paid. And as far as I'm concerned, it paid off.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I am quite amazed by the strength of that card, though. That is, yeah, I mean, in my day, you would have had something like Lord of the Pit, would have been 7/7, would have had in fact, the Lord of the Pit had a significant penalty associated with it, where I think you had to kill a creature every time it was
Okay.
in play, every round it was in play, or it would do damage to you. So,
Okay.
and that was the only way they got the score down to seven, the casting cost down to seven.
Okay.
So it's
Sorry.
quite different.
Okay, I can't resist this. I want to try and get
Yes.
your reaction to
Oh dear.
probably one of the strongest, one of the more stronger recent cards in past sets. This one's from Duskmourn that came up a few months ago, last year or so. Okay, Abhorrent Oculus. It costs two and a blue, so mana value is three.
Yeah,
So
yep.
it's an eye creature. It's an eye, right? It's a blue eye creature. As an additional cost to cast a spell, exile 6 cards from your graveyard.
Okay.
Flying, 5/5.
Yep.
At the beginning of your opponent's upkeep of each opponent's upkeep, manifest dread, which means look at the top two cards of your library, put one on a battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other in your graveyard. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card.
And
I
this
want
all
to
this for three. All this for three. Yeah, no.
Well,
As a
normally three, but if you're just casting it normally, then
yeah,
you exile 6 cards from your graveyard.
yeah, which I wouldn't be too worried about though in
Ah,
general. Okay.
but there are decks that
I
circle around cheating this card out, mine included.
okay. Yes. I guess you could.
Right.
I guess you could exhaust the graveyard in certain situations. But go on. Yep.
Right. So, one strategy is surveil, which means look at the top card, you may put it in the graveyard. So that's a recent strategy that's more abused with some lands that enable it now. So you would play cards like Consider or use a surveil land, which it is a certain new kind of dual land that you can put something in the graveyard. You could just ditch Oculus in there, and maybe by turn two you can play Unearth on it. It costs three or less to play, so you can just bring back the Oculus from the graveyard as soon as turn two.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
Um.
5/5 on turn two.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very different. I mean, generally speaking, the basic casting cost was related to the strength of the creatures when I was playing. So yeah, if it was a 5/5, you'd be looking at least a cost of five.
Yeah.
To that was before it even had special abilities. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
back in the day, I think Savannah Lion was like the big payoff for one mana and so forth. You get like a 2/1 for one.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I hadn't thought about that in a long time, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
there
sure,
were there
right.
were there were a couple of others too.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Yeah, right.
there
But
were a couple of
nowadays,
issues.
for one mana, you have Ragavan, and I'm not going to get into Ragavan right now. But
Gosh.
yeah, but suffice to say, I just wanted to tell you about my Friday, my Friday, and I had a good time. And but I guess we have to talk about more pressing political matters first, I think. Uh,
Glad you had a good time. Yes.
yes, I did. And
Yes. Yes.
all right, it's time to pass it right on to you. You had great men of history.
Yes, thank you very much. So okay, so each, as mentioned previously, each episode I'll be talking about one or occasionally two men. And this one, today I have picked Charles Darwin. So he's a well-known figure. He proposed the concept of natural selection as a mechanism for evolution. So I want to be very clear. This is something that and I looked at the Wikipedia article actually when I was sort of just gathering a few dates and so forth. And the Wikipedia article kind of doesn't explain it properly. Darwin did not propose evolution. The idea of evolution had existed for actually quite a long time.
Oh yeah.
There were ancient Roman writers who noticed that, say, zebras and horses looked the same, looked very similar, and raised the question: could they have some sort of common ancestor? So that's the idea of evolution. Species, essentially one species splitting into two at some point in the past. What Darwin did was he proposed the a mechanism of natural selection as essentially a solution to evolution. What's particularly interesting about this is he did it without understanding chromosomes, because chromosomes weren't discovered until the 1950s, decades after he died. Once you know about chromosomes, natural selection is kind of obvious. But doing it without the knowledge of chromosomes is genius. So essentially with natural selection. He said survival of the fittest, just to give people a quick rundown. And what that really meant was people make jokes about it, survival, the guy who can run fastest. But no, the real what it really meant is fit in the sense of fit to survive. So essentially, the environment throws a bunch of stuff at the individual. Some individuals will do better than other individuals, and some individuals will die, others will survive, and the ones who survive will pass on their genes to their offspring, and so all of the next generation will have, or a greater proportion of the next generation will have those genes that came from those who survived. And there's all sorts of examples of this. I mean, here in Australia, there was a virus that was released. We have a rabbit population because the early British settlers thought releasing rabbits was a great idea, so you can hunt them. And they released a virus called myxomatosis which I think came from Spain or something, and it wiped out the vast majority of the rabbit population. The rabbit population later recovered, and now you can't use myxomatosis against them because they're all descended from rabbits who survived myxomatosis. So,
Okay.
yeah. Anyway, there's all sorts of examples of it. Evolution or natural selection don't necessarily imply one species becoming another because there's microevolution where a species will change over time. There's all sorts of things. There's plenty of examples of this, by the way. We've been tracking evolution now for about 150 years, and they're already spotting changes in humanity. Less people have wisdom teeth. More people are being born without wisdom teeth, which I think is really interesting. There are a growing number of people are being born with a third artery in the arm. So there's most people have two arteries, I think going back 100 years, they had found occasionally a person would have three arteries, and for whatever reason, this has become significantly more common in the last 100 years. So there are some other examples too, but of changes in the human form, even only that relatively short period of time. And one of the interesting things about it actually is that Darwin himself thought that evolution was probably a fairly slow process. That was the sort of the mainstream view for a long time. We now know it actually can be quite quick, and species can adapt in quite short time frames. Another one example here is an introduced species called the cane toad in Australia, and we know that some animals and plants have already that was introduced about 100 years ago, I think, and some in the areas where it's been around for a few decades, some animals and plants have already adapted to the cane toad, in that some plants have become poisonous to it, which means presumably the cane toad was munching down on them, and the all the ones that it could eat, it ate, and the surviving plants were all the ones that it couldn't eat, and so now those plants are actually dangerous to cane toads. So it's interesting how it can happen quite quickly.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes, sorry, I did want to mention about. Unless you want to jump in with anything.
Well, so I've actually always wondered about how it kind of picks it about what is fit to survive and so forth. It's
Mm,
almost like there's some mutations or so forth, but it's kind of but it always
yes.
baffled me how it kind of decided that it would kind of do that going forward. But it's seeming like it's more just whatever ends up surviving kind of becomes more of what it has, like the poisons and so forth.
Yeah. I mean, I'll get on to something called epigenetics in a minute. There's a new area of genetics called epigenetics. It's been discovered only in the last sort of 30 years, and that sort of it adds an interesting dimension to it. But in terms of natural selection itself, yes, it's kind of dumb in that the species has a variety of characteristics, that it has a variety of capabilities. In any given environment, some of those capabilities or may actually be more beneficial, and therefore they're more likely. The creatures with those characteristics are more likely to survive. A simple example might be and interestingly enough, one of the early examples that was proposed, I think, turned out to be wrong, but it kind of turned out is an interesting example. Uh, the theory was that in the UK, in industrial cities, there was a lot of soot around and so forth, and there was a particular species of moth that they proposed if it had if it was more black, it could survive more easily in these cities and not get picked off by the birds and so forth. And so the hypothesis was that it would that they would actually become more black over time because of the soot and whatnot that was in the cities, and they were adapting to it. So yeah, they would essentially, yeah, they would the nature of the environment had changed, and then the key here is that the environment pretty much changes constantly, and this is kind of if an animal if the environment stopped changing, then an animal could eventually potentially reach some sort of optimum solution for that environment, and it would no longer be needing to adapt to the environment, although there would still be things like what they call genetic drift, just random mutations, and that's so there'd still be change, right? But but the environment keeps changing, and so in a certain sense, the animals are constantly playing catch up with natural selection. They're constantly trying to adapt to an environment which is changing, which means the species is changing and so forth. But having said that, there are long-lived species like certain species of cockroaches that are morphologically have been the same for tens of millions of years. I hypothesize, though, that if you could somehow, find a 10 million year old member of this species, thaw it out if it's in amber or whatever, and bring it to life, and you tried to make it with a modern one, probably wouldn't work. Even though they might be morphologically the same and they look the same, I'd say genetically they're probably quite different. But there's all sorts of things like that. In the atmospheric composition of the Earth has changed, even from a few tens of millions of years ago. I mean, if we invented a time machine and decided to go back and visit the dinosaurs, and we travel back, 70 million years and walked out, we'd all suffocate because
Mm.
the oxygen level would be different. So we'd have to be carrying oxygen masks. Even over that period of time, the composition of the atmosphere has changed, and animals that have been alive over that period of time have had to adapt. Anyway, I just wanted to mention a little bit about natural selection and evolution. There's actually something else called Lamarckian evolution. That was a type of evolution that existed before Darwin. And I believe a lot of people, a lot of scientists who are contemporaries of Darwin, believed in Lamarckian evolution before he proposed natural selection.
Mhm.
And Lamarckian evolution is actually kind of interesting too. It proposes that you can, by acting in a particular way, you predispose the future of your descendants. So, if, for example, I decided to be buff and go to the gym every day and I work out on the weights, my children would be stronger according to
Right.
Lamarckian evolution. Right, according to
I, I
Lamarckian
I
evolution.
remember hearing about Lamarck and and
Yeah.
that's the exact analogy that was used.
Yeah, right. So yeah, right. So now Lamarckian evolution sort of fell out of favor when natural selection was proposed, but interestingly, it might have made a bit of a comeback. Okay.
Really?
Yes. So there's an area I mentioned it before. It's called epigenetics. Up until the development of epigenetics, it was assumed that genes ran kind of like a program. They were completely independent of the environment. They would produce proteins, do what they do, and they would advantage the animal in the environment or disadvantages or whatever, and that's how it worked. Epigenetics is the study of environmental factors on gene expression. So what they found now, and this is only within the last 30 years really, is that the environment affects the way genes express, and apparently it can be quite significant. One of the interesting aspects that they're looking at the moment is that the food you eat and the food even so the food you eat can affect your gene expression in the sense that possibly eating healthier food might cause your genes to behave better and might be one of the reasons why eating healthier food is actually makes you healthier because the gene expression changes. But, and this is almost a bit nihilistic, the the way your parents lived and even the way your grandparents lived could be affecting your genes. So the food that your grandparents ate could actually affect your genes. So if you had grandparents that, I don't know, were in a gulag or something in Soviet Russia, that might actually mean you're less healthy than you would otherwise have been. So it's quite interesting. But epigenetics has raised the specter that Lamarckian evolution might have something in it. Because if genes can if the environment can affect genes, right, then it raises the possibility that something you do could impact your environment in a Lamarckian fashion. And I think that's still a very new area, but it's interesting that after sort of 150 years of being discredited, Lamarckian evolution's popped up again.
Mhm.
Very new area. Anyway, that's so a quick discussion of natural selection and evolution. But Charles Darwin was the first one, as I said, to propose natural selection. He was, as were many of the natural philosophers of the time, the scientists of his day. He was quite a well-to-do man. His father was quite wealthy. He was offered a trip on a ship called the Beagle, and the Beagle was going to go off and do a 2-year journey, and he would be able to study geology. He was actually a geologist too, so he studied geology and biology. In those days, scientists did a bit of everything. So he studied some geology, some biology, whatnot. While he was sailing around the world. In the end, the Beagle's journey was 5 years long, which I don't think Darwin minded at all because I think he had the time of his life. Except there was one negative I'll get to in a minute. Originally his father didn't want him to go, but he was talked into it, which is great. So he gave his son. The father thought it'd be a waste of time, believe it or not, but he was anyway. So I mean, it changed the world. Anyway, unfortunately, poor old Darwin. This is probably not an unreasonable thing to happen, and not unusual at the time. He developed some sort of illness on the journey. Who knows what? Maybe caught a virus or something. He was quite sick for part of the journey, and I understand his health was never quite the same afterwards. But I think if you'd asked Darwin, he would say it was a fair price to pay for the opportunity that the trip gave him. So anyway, he came home and essentially spent pretty much the rest of his life studying the collection he'd gathered and writing books and so forth. So he spent quite a lot of time in South America. He spent time famously in the Galapagos Islands, which are a part of Ecuador today. I think pretty much the entire place is a nature reserve today. The Galapagos Islands are considered to be almost a biological lab because some of the interesting things that exist there. So that's why Ecuador has really tried to protect it and enforce that because unfortunately poachers go there and try to get the tortoises and so forth. One of the interesting things he found, and I think that I believe it was Darwin that found it, and not someone later, but I think that this may have even influenced his theory of evolution, natural selection. That he found that there were tortoises. Say you had islands A, B, and C, right? And you had tortoises on island A and tortoises on island B could have fertile offspring, and that's normally the definition of the two individuals being in the same species. If a male and a female can have fertile offspring, and he found that the animals, the tortoises from island B and the tortoises from island C, could have fertile offspring, but the ones from A and C couldn't. And this breaches the definition of species because if species were completely I guess hermetic and unchanging, you would never find this situation. I mean, a horse and a zebra can't have fertile offspring, for example. A horse and a donkey normally can't. Mules that come from horses and donkeys normally aren't fertile. That's why they're considered to be separate species. But nature being what it is, biology being what it is, every once in a while, actually a horse and a donkey do produce a fertile offspring. But as long as they don't do it regularly, they're not considered to be members of the same species. So this raised the question: if the tortoises from A and B, islands A and B, are the same species because they can produce fertile offspring, and the ones from B and C can as well, how can A and C not be the same species? So this was clearly breaking the definition of species. And I think they start to think about the idea that you've got what effectively we've got here is two species in the process of separation. Give it another few thousand years, perhaps there'll be two distinct species that can't mate and have produced fertile offspring at all. Anyway, so while he was traveling, he didn't actually go to the city of Darwin, interestingly enough, but the city of Darwin, on a future journey of the Beagle, they visited the area of what is now Darwin in Australia, and they named the city after him. Just looking to see if I've covered all my main points. I think I have. Oh no, I've got to mention Alfred Russel Wallace. So there was another gentleman by the name of Alfred Russel Wallace who was actually working in Indonesia for a while, around about the same time as Darwin. If you've ever heard of the Wallace line, that's named after him. I don't know if you would have heard of that. It's in my part of the world, so okay. So there's an interesting line that runs through Indonesia. Indonesia is a large archipelago state north of Australia. On one side of the line, this line kind of runs down the middle of a water passage in Indonesia. On one side of the line, most of the land animals are Asian. On the other side of the line, most of the land animals share an ancestry with Australia. Birds and fish, of course, cross the line without a problem. And what's going on is that it's essentially the water is wide enough at that point that it's a barrier for land animals. So a few have managed to make the crossing, but most haven't. As a result, within Indonesia, there are these two very distinct groups of land animals on each side of the country. And Wallace was there studying it, and he noticed this. And he proposed a similar idea of natural selection as well. I believe the two papers were ended up being released and presented together. So really, it's a joint discovery between it. Charles Darwin is far better known, I think, because he was richer and better connected. But really, I think that really it should be shared equally. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say on Charles Darwin. Really changed the world, did some extraordinary stuff, and as I said, did all this before chromosomes were discovered, which was an extraordinary leap.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I got I yeah. In addition to the Lamarckian ideas, I've been aware that there's been several other kind of postulates about the possibility of evolution. In fact, if I remember correctly, there was someone named Buffon, I think it was, that also suggested evolution, but said that we regressed into lesser animals. I don't know if it was Buffon or not, but I think there was some weird theories about that. So they've been kind of all over the place, kind of toying the idea around.
Exactly, and I have read about him, but it was a long time ago, so I probably won't comment.
Yeah.
But yes, that's exactly right. And it makes sense. They've got very limited information, and all they can really do is just toy with different ideas, see that it makes sense, see if you can develop a model that matches experimental evidence and so forth. So, and I applaud them for some of the novel ideas they came up with, even if some of them were perhaps amusingly wrong to us, but we've got
Yeah,
the benefit of hundreds of years of hindsight. So yes,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there's another one I'm thinking of right now that's more parallel to evolution as opposed to something in the same lines as catastrophism, in which entire species might have been uh, uh, gotten extinct to make way for brand new ones, and they kind of came in waves and so forth, which I don't know if it's really defensible sort of a theory at the moment, but that's another. They were really trying different ideas out, to be sure.
exactly. And I mean, we do know that there have been mass extinctions, which is kind of a wave, but not in any sort of not in the way that they probably meant, because these things are
Probably not.
not planned. I think that I think the idea you're talking about is some sort of planned or inevitable event
Right.
versus the way it's actually happened, which is large rocks dropping on the earth and blowing dust and
Exactly.
ash into the
Yeah.
atmosphere. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, I had a very strange idea of how we went from era to era when I was a kid. It's beyond unscientific. It's very childish, but I
Yeah.
always thought that they have that each era was ended with some kind of a great catastrophe, maybe like a volcano erupting or like meteors falling the Earth. So
Yeah.
we have so that's how the medieval times ended, which went to the next one, which then ended the next
Nice.
one, and
Nice.
right, yeah, like
Yes.
Japan's Edo period. We don't have samurais anymore because they got like a volcano or something like that, and now we
Or,
have
or an
cities
astro
and
or an asteroid hit them or something, right? Yes, yes. I love
right,
it.
right. And someday we're gonna get asteroids hit on us, and then that's when we'll be replaced by robot people. Right.
There used to be a game called Sim Earth. I don't know if you played it. This was back in the
I know the
90s.
Sim franchise,
Yeah,
so
right. Yeah, yeah. So this was one of the early ones, probably the fifth or sixth title or something. But it had in Sim Earth, you would start with a planet that was cooling, and then life would evolve, and you'd evolve different sorts of animals, and you could manipulate it in some cases, or just let it run and see what it turned up with, and eventually a sentient species would evolve, and they would develop technology, and if they lasted long enough, they would actually develop nanotechnology and leave the planet. And then the planet would actually return to a pristine primordial state, and kind of the time cycle would reset, and you could actually evolve another intelligent species on the same planet within the game. But there was actually an Easter egg in the game, and what would happen is every once in a while the sophisticated technological species, which could be mammals or lizards or whatever, would develop robots, and what robots would actually become feral in the game, and you had these wild robots developing around, and they would actually wander around. They were like a new class of animals that were wandering around the planet. And if the intelligent species then left the planet, it was actually possible for a robot sentience to appear, and you actually ended up with a robot civilization. It only happened very occasionally. I think I may have only had it maybe half a dozen times or something the time I played. It was deliberately meant to be quite rare, but you would occasionally end up with a robot civilization appearing. So anyway, yes, it was a great little game from 30 years ago. But one of the fun
yeah.
things about it was they actually did their homework. They had the sun continually become more luminescent over time, and that's actually what actually happens. And I remember a friend of mine at the time complained it was a bug in the game and it would wipe out your planet eventually. And I said, no, I think that's might be how it works. And I checked later, and yes, it is. So they actually had, and it was a way of basically guaranteeing your species didn't last forever because the planet would eventually get hotter and hotter and hotter, and life would eventually cease on the planet. And that was because, and that is indeed what happens with the sun. So without sun.
Well, yeah.
Yes. So I think they projected that life on Earth might have about 1 billion years or something. Even though the Earth might have another 4.5 billion years left, I think they're saying that the life probably only has about 1 billion years, or certainly advanced life has 1 billion years. So we've got 1 billion years to build space colonies and get out of here. Anyway, yeah. So it's interesting stuff to speculate onto yeah. Actually, while we're on the subject,
Yeah.
I did mention about the wisdom teeth, and I actually think the wisdom teeth are a little bit of a mystery because I'm not sure that I don't think natural selection could be explaining the wisdom teeth disappearing at the rate they're disappearing. Possibly epigenetics is, but I wonder if there's something else at work too that we haven't discovered yet. So there's some speculation because wisdom teeth do seem to be disappearing at a fairly significant rate where I believe even now a significant proportion of the population are now being born without them. So,
How long ago has this been starting?
well, they've only been tracking for about 100, years.
Oh,
And they've noticed a difference, yeah. So there is another one too that escapes me now. There's the artery in the arm, the wisdom teeth, and there was a third one too that they've discovered as well in humans. It escapes me at the moment. But yeah, so there are some things. It'd be interesting to see over a few hundred years what happens next in terms of we will have hundreds of years of data on human evolution, and I'm sure we'll have this huge within a few hundred years we'll have an understanding of what we can't even imagine at the moment.
right.
So there's still mysteries out there, scientific mysteries out there to be solved.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Mm.
Actually, it's a slightly different thing, but I'm reminded of something. I won't go into the whole story, but there's a geneticist that actually wants to track the genetics of his family
Mhm.
over multiple generations. And I might have mentioned it once quickly in a previous episode. He has arranged for himself, his parents, and his grandparents to all have their DNA sequenced, and his children to have the DNA sequenced. So that's four generations, right? And he wants it to go on for at least another four generations. So he's instilled in his children this idea that the family should continue this for at least another four generations. And there's a particular reason why he's picked eight generations. But yeah, this is what he wants. He's already got four generations, and what he wants is at least another four. And then the geneticists of the future will have a confirmed set of people where they're tracking the movement of the chromosomes through eight generations. I can probably explain why he picked eight generations. And this is something I realized one day. I had a bit of a light bulb moment. And I realized this geneticist, when I read about it, being a geneticist, he'd gone well beyond what I thought about when I was looking at this. Essentially, and this is a bit shocking, you're not genetically related to all of your ancestors. It's a bit of a wild idea, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're not genetically related to all of your ancestors. There are only 46 human chromosomes, right? So you can imagine those 46 human chromosomes kind of going backwards in time through your parents and your grandparents and your great-grandparents and so forth, right? They're extending back. If you go back tens of millions of years, there is a different number of chromosomes or whatever. But at least for over the last few 100,000 years, these 46 chromosomes are extending back in time. So there are 46 lines of individuals going back that have passed down chromosomes to you. Okay. Now, he did a bit of study and he realized that there can be, well, he actually measured it, there can be genes that can actually cross between chromosomes. So when he did some maths and he determined that there's essentially 120 lines of ancestors that go back that you're in some way genetically related to. Okay. And the rest of your ancestors, you're not genetically related to them. And so what he's planning to do when he gets to the end of this eight generations is the geneticists of the future should be able to take this whole set of his family, all the individuals, and look at the genes, and they should be able to find an individual alive in their day, a couple hundred years from now, who is not genetically related to one of the original ancestors. That's the idea. That's what he wants to prove. Yeah, he wants to prove it. So even though we know this idea is right based on the mathematics and our understanding of genetics, nobody's been able to prove it because nobody's had DNA testing for long enough. His plan is to prove it in maybe 200 years or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. In humans. I suppose you could do it in other species that accelerate it and so forth, but he wants to do it in humans. So there it is.
Yeah.
So his own family, he said, hopefully his descendants will do this for another 4 or 5 generations, and they'll be able to prove once and for all. They'll be able to pick an individual alive then and say, look, that person is not genetically related to this person who lived, hundreds of years ago. Yeah. So that's why. Anyway, it's a bit off the track, but I just I read about that recently, and so yeah. But most people find the idea, and I certainly did when I first realized it, the idea that you're not genetically related to all of your ancestors, I think, mind blowing.
Yeah, that's. I mean, when you think about it, it's kind of when you get sufficiently far removed, your genes are kind of going on a path. So, it's not unfathomable. It's not so out of left field in my mind that it's like uh, uh, I don't know, like outer space turning white or something like that. It's like
Yeah,
it's
it's a strange idea though, isn't it? Yeah, the only ones you can be sure of, barring paternity fraud, if you ran a male line back, all of those men should have the same Y chromosome. And I'm quite fortunate in my family that I can trace. I didn't do it; other people did it, but the male line has been traced back quite a long way. And so we've actually got some pictures of people. I've got a picture of a direct male ancestor back in the 16th century and another one in the 14th century. And barring paternity fraud, those men have the same Y chromosome that I have.
mm,
Yeah, which is pretty wild, I think. The only difference being mutations. So
right.
obviously we'd never know if there was paternity fraud, but yeah, it's an interesting thought. And of course with the female line, you've got the mitochondria, so you can trace the mitochondria back along a pure female line going all the way back as well for the same reason.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know that's the way to do it for female
Yeah,
lines.
everyone gets their mitochondria from their mother, I have heard there may be edge cases, but as a general rule, people get their mitochondria from their mother. So the mitochondria, as you probably know, it's outside the regular DNA. I mean, the joke is it's the powerhouse of the cell, and everyone always calls it, that. And it does make cells more efficient, and it has its own DNA. And it's thought to have been another organism that became embedded in a cell in ancient times, like millions of years ago, and made the cell better and more efficient. So it outclassed the other cells, and that's why we all have mitochondria. But
Mhm.
yes, you
That's
can. So yeah. So you can trace your maternal line through it.
okay.
But they're the only two lines, pure paternal, pure maternal, that you can guarantee you can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
easily.
Mhm.
Anyway, so yeah, a bit off the track there, but so yeah, getting back uh, to Darwin. Yes, thus I present Charles Darwin, great man of history. Also mentioned Alfred Russel Wallace, who also did, as I said, some of the work along with him and proposed essentially the same idea. And Wallace did some fantastic work. He was more of a field guy, I think, working there
Mhm.
in Indonesia. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, and now I'm remembering something.
Hmm,
I have heard that some people should insist on calling this the Darwin Wallace theory instead of just the Darwin
yeah,
theory. I'm actually kind of
yeah.
remembering that right now when I'm
I
mentioning
mean,
things.
as I'm sitting here, even I'm doing it. I made Charles Darwin the great man of history, and I mentioned Alfred Russel Wallace as well.
Mhm.
Whereas I mean, I think Darwin did more on the theoretical basis of the
Yeah,
hypothesis rather than Whereas Wallace was more along the observation. He'd observed it and proposed it, but I think Darwin did. That's my feeling. Darwin put in probably more of the legwork.
right. Yeah.
But having said that, yes, I think that is not an unreasonable thing. I mean, there's similar sorts of things because calculus was now Leibniz. Yeah, so calculus was invented twice by Newton and a German mathematician by the name of Leibniz about the same
Leibniz. Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Leibniz,
Yes.
thank you, about the same
Yes.
time. And of course, I must mention that calculus has been reinvented independently many, many times since. I think hundreds or thousands of times, and even by school children. There've been school children who've, not knowing about it, have independently come up with calculus.
Yeah, right.
So,
Well,
so if you ever struggle, I was going to say, if you ever struggled with calculus at school, just remember there was a
mhm.
kid out there who actually invented it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing I could kind of sort of be proud of, it's not nearly as many calculus, is that I came up with the idea of different what's the term? Different bases for counting without
Oh, nice.
knowing its existence.
Yes, yes,
Right. Like
nice.
yeah, like base 8, base 4, which eight I would come to find is called octals or
Yes,
octets.
exactly.
Yeah.
Octal. Yeah,
Octals, yeah, right, yeah,
yeah,
yes.
yeah,
And then there's
yeah,
hexadecimals and so forth. So yeah, like
yeah.
I was
Oh, very
entertaining the
cool.
idea at some point, but as it turns out, it was a real thing. So
Yeah,
how
right. Yeah.
interesting.
And this is the case. It's these ideas. I mean, the only thing is that would have been a revolutionary discovery if only you lived 500 years before.
Mhm.
So you were just too late to the party, unfortunately, in discovering it. That's right. But this is the
Exactly,
thing.
yeah.
A lot of ideas are developed independently many, many times over. And of course, they are often developed many, many times over at the same time as well, because technology has reached that point. That's a very common thing as well, where technology will reach a point where people can kind of reach for a particular idea, and then a whole bunch of people will reach for it all at the same time. So it can be difficult to establish, in some cases, who was first
Yeah, oh yeah,
as
for
well.
sure. Well,
Yeah,
when we go into our next subject, which is the discovery of Neptune, that's an exact kind of a situation that we'll be talking about.
nice.
So if it's okay to go on to
That's
Neptune.
that's all I have on Charles Darwin.
Okay, sir. All right, so we're going to talk about a few more people in history that are quite great here. So now the discovery of Neptune. Now before we get to some of to the main guys, it was suggested that Galileo did in fact see Neptune, but didn't know
Ah,
what it was. Because he had some drawings that kind of indicated what would later turn out to possibly be the placement of Neptune in the sky, but I think he mistook it for like a star or something.
yeah.
So he
Because
didn't officially discover it, but he may have seen it.
Yeah, because it would have been moving very slowly, and that is something actually that has happened before as well. I think if I remember correctly, just diverting the with this Pluto, when they discovered Pluto, when they looked back, they'd found it had occurred on other people's photographic plates, and they hadn't picked it up.
Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
so other people had captured photos of Pluto, but they hadn't recognized it as a body that was moving, wasn't a star.
Yeah, to be sure, yeah, right.
Yeah,
Okay, so Alexis Bouvard, French astronomer, th this is not even the main guy I'm talking about, by the way, is that so he suggested that something was altering Uranus's orbit, right? Because it was kind
that's
of
right.
inconsistent with some of the star maps,
Mm.
and and basically the hypothesis was only something as big as another planet, possibly that size, but still not what they weren't sure about, would be so strong as to perturb the orbit of Uranus. So he
Mm.
hypothesized that, but he died, and another French astronomer, which we will get into, Urbain Jean Leverrier, decided to take up the calculations and do his own work on it. But in the UK, uh, John Couch Adams was the astronomer that was using the Newton's law of gravitation to try and calculate that body that affected Uranus. He wanted to tackle the problem himself, right? And you got to appreciate that this was kind of difficult at the time because nowadays you got computers that'll just do that probably in a snap, right? But so it was a really, you know, painstaking time to kind of do such a thing, but probably no less exciting. Uh, but in 1845, he presented it to James Chalice of Cambridge Observatory, and that person in turn requested more data on the position of Uranus to kind of corroborate everything. So he requested that data from the Astronomer Royal, George Biddle Airy at the Royal Observatory. So, but the thing was, Chalice was kind of unimpressed with the results. Basically, it's like kind of basically saying, "So what?" And kind of, and this was coupled by the fact that Adams was a very modest type of guy, right? And he didn't really want to publish anything that would either affect his career for better or worse. He was kind of reserved, and he had other work to do, so he's kind of because he didn't really push the idea hard enough, I think. But at the same time that John Couch Adams was doing this, so we'll go back to Leverrier, who picked up the slack of Alexis Bouvard. So he did his own an investigation, and he published his findings as to the prediction of where Neptune would be. And France ignored him too, but ironically, the UK didn't. The UK ignored Adams,
And then,
but yeah, and so they took Leverrier's study. Um, the Astronomer Royal saw to its horror that it agreed with Adams' theory, so demanded that Chalice look for the damn thing. And this was like an emergency situation because
yeah,
it's like a
right.
matter of national pride.
That's right.
Uh, right.
We must find it
And
before the French.
right. And and in a strange turn of events, Chalice looked at the wrong star maps. He looked at outdated star maps
Oh
and was
no.
not able to kind of verify that, right? So so back to the France thing. France. So Leverrier was getting ignored by France, right? So he went to the Berlin Observatory astronomer. So he might have to go to Germany for this one. So he went to the astronomer Johann Gottfried Galle, um, and it kind of had it went to him, and they demanded, well, not demanded, they requested the guy. I'm trying to remember if he was the head of the observatory at the time, Encke. You know Encke, the astronomer. So they wanted to use his fancy telescope, right? And apparently, uh, he was celebrating his 55th birthday and was in a very good mood. And he was like, "Go right ahead, use my telescope." And right, and and sort of word spread that they were looking for a new planet, and so there was like a student or two that overheard this and is like please let me be a part of this investigation. Let me look for this new planet. So the
Yeah,
team kind of built up, and they found the planet
nice.
because of updated star maps uh, and so forth. So and and so they found the planet, and then the people in the UK is like, nope, Adams found it first. So there was kind of like a controversy, and the French thought it was English sour grapes, and so this is another situation in which where independent work on the same problem basically could be argued that you could share the credit in this
Yeah,
sport and so forth. So and there's been a lot of controversy since this guy got this detail wrong. He didn't really have enough that the other got and so forth. And there's even been controversy as to whether Neptune was sufficient enough to uh, mess with Uranus's orbit, and I think they proposed another planet called Hyperion, but I think that was it didn't go anywhere. But yeah, so it was a pretty exciting time to be a scientist
yeah,
in that part
yeah.
that in that century. So I just figured I'd kind of show that since we talked about Uranus before. I know this was something that really stuck with me as a very dynamic story. So.
Yeah, yeah, nice. I have read about it, but it was a long time ago, so it's great to hear about it again, actually. Yeah. I mean it was quite I mean it's lots of interesting stuff happens now, of course, but it can be perhaps more subtle. Whereas at that point they were, yes, discovering new planets, or in the case of Herschel, discovering what he thought was a planet, Ceres. That's the first one, yeah,
Oh yeah.
which were later called asteroids and so forth, as I think we talked about previously. But these were extraordinary, major discoveries that were being made in the 18th and 19th centuries. Quite an extraordinary time to be a scientist. We talked about the eclipse, the Venusian eclipse, in the 19th century. Anyway, I won't mention
I
it now.
don't
I think okay,
I
because
don't
that would be
know.
interesting. That would be an interesting one to talk about. I think it was 19th. Yeah, but yes, it would have been 18th century. Sorry, late 18th century. So well, transit of Venus, I should say. Transits of Venus occur in pairs. So that's for transit of Venus, where Venus transits the Sun and can be seen from Earth. Transits of Venus occur in pairs, 8 years apart, separated by a period of over a century. And it's not always the same period of time, but they're always over a century, and then there are two. In the last 2000, as people may recall, there was one in 2004 and one in 2012. Well, there was also one in 1769, I think it was. So it must have been 1761 as well, or something. So anyway, I won't go into it now, but there were all sorts of fascinating stories that occurred around those events, because, in fact, it was an early example of international scientific cooperation, because the great powers of Europe all sent ships and to their colonies, their far-flung colonies, to try to measure the how long it took Venus to transit the sun from different parts of the world, because astronomers had worked out they could figure out how far away the sun was if they got good enough data. And so you had people going all over the place. One story involves a French scientist disappearing, going off to build an observatory, not returning to France for 11 years, by which time he's been declared dead. His wife is remarried.
Well,
His relatives have plundered his estate. Another story actually involved secret orders to search the South Pacific, and that was actually James Cook. So the reason that James Cook was in the South Pacific, and when he came across when he claimed the eastern edge of the Australian continent, was he was actually there to build an observatory in Tahiti to measure the transit of Venus. And so, yeah, and he had secret orders to actually search for land masses and claim them.
mm,
So I really think it would be you can do a really great mini series out of these, of doing some of these stories of these people who were traveling around the globe, all and governments were not beyond not you doing a land grab out of it, because
right.
they might have felt suspicious. If the French might have thought it was suspicious for the British to be sending a ship to the South Pacific normally, but oh no, you're building the observatory in Tahiti, no problem at all. Yeah.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the British are grabbing land.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Um, so I'm gonna skip the other thing I had on my list is I had a bit of a rant about advertisements and commercials, which is not really a rant all negative, but kind of looking back on some positive. I'll save that till next time. But there is something I kind of want to get in before you go
Yeah, yeah.
into Zoe McQuillan because we've been talking about these great men who were fascinated by these kind of scientific prospects and the possibility of making uh, such an impactful discovery. So. This is in stark contrast. So, so we can argue that these discoveries shape civilization, right? It's not just the manual labor and so forth that goes to building the infrastructure, but
Mm.
also the ideas that kind of move any given society forward, and their minds kind of go forward, right? But it's this, it's not, you know, it really isn't j- primarily, if at all, sex that motivates this stuff. It's genuine curiosity. I'm speaking on in terms of men who make discoveries and make achievements.
Yes,
They do
yes.
it because this is you know a channel on behalf of men for sure. I
Mm.
figured I'd kind of talk about this. You know, men are about uh, going for those discoveries. These are the in themselves the motivations. So it's not because we have to reproduce or we do this all for womankind or some
Yes,
gynocentric nonsense like that. This is really relevant. This is
it
not me
is.
just shoehorning in the anti-gynocentrism. Um, this is what men do because
Yes.
they really want to.
And
They
they're fascinated by it and they want
Mhm.
to understand it.
Right.
I have thought of this too,
Yeah.
exactly. So many of the activities you see men engage in, evolutionists will really come up with really come down to this idea of, oh, it's all about reproduction and propagating your genes. It's really hard to see some activities that people get involved in could possibly really, it would have to be very indirect to end up coming back to that. In some cases, they actively destroy their own ability to
Oh
reproduce,
yeah.
particularly men, in engaging in these activities, which would have to be anti-evolutionary, and yet they're doing it anyway. So there's more going on, isn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yep.
So I like what we're doing is what I wanted to say, kind of paying tribute to these men who
Mm.
had their own motivations.
Yes.
Right, right, yeah. And but it, it must have been exciting to discover things like Neptune or really kind of hammer down the evolutionary process but in biological terms and so forth. And
Absolutely.
and here's the thing. I've got two things to talk about. I'll try and keep it as short as possible because we're well over our usual time. But um, one of them is that we take for granted a lot of the discoveries right now. Like uh, not even just like the trans-Neptunian objects, like what Pluto now falls under. It's hard. I don't know if the average layman knows about Eris, Haumea, Makemake, and others that are kind of past Neptune now, so
Yes.
or Quaoar. I think I remember when Quaoar was discovered when I was in school, was in high
Yep.
school, um,
Yeah,
and
I
since
think
yeah,
people hear about it on the news, but probably
mhm,
in a lot of cases it's quickly forgotten. They don't really think about it unless you've got an interest in astronomy. You won't really be thinking about. And you're absolutely right. There's so many amazing things that have been discovered even in our lifetimes, and
mhm,
so many amazing
yeah,
things that we know, and people take it for
right,
granted. Yep.
right. And what about TRAPPIST-1? The most exciting solar system I've seen is TRAPPIST-1.
Yep.
Right, yeah. I don't know if you know what TRAPPIST-1 is, but
Yes.
oh yeah, yeah. Then you know what I'm talking about. That
I'm a
that that
a
those
bit
are
of an
some
astronomy geek too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Those are some fascinating looking planets, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
to be sure. So I don't know. I'm thrilled to bits by stuff like that. I hope,
Yeah, that would probably be a good discussion for a future episode. Actually, we can talk a little bit
yeah.
about more about astronomy. Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff that
Mhm,
that
yeah.
has come up even in the last few years. with the newer telescopes and so forth, they're able to see things that it was beyond our wildest dreams even a few decades ago. There's a really great book that I read as a kid. It was gosh, I'm trying to think of the title now, but the it was about uh, uh, it was the book was written. The book is a guide. It's essentially written is if the author is living in the 24th century and humans have settled a number of worlds and interstellar travel is possible. It's expensive, but it's possible. And the book is about people who are considering actually migrating to colony world. And it was really common a lot of people my age had it when they were kids and so forth. But the authors assumed that in the book they have to go in starships to get to a solar system to be able to examine the planets and discover whether there's water on them or life on them or whatever, right? In reality, we can tell from here to a large degree. So
Yeah.
it's absolutely extraordinary. They're detecting methane in other solar systems, and it's extraordinary what's being found. And this was beyond the wildest dreams. By the way, the book is excellently written. It's a fabulous book, but it was beyond the wildest dreams of people who were writing books in the 1970s that this would be possible. We have a
Absolutely.
pretty good idea of what some of these planets' their atmospheres are like.
Hmm. Right. Yeah.
Yep,
Right.
extraordinary.
Right. Um, yeah, and the second point I wanted to make about this is so every time people make an achievement or some semblance of an achievement nowadays, or have an experience, um, this is a parallel to kind of taking it for granted. They do it strictly to show off other people instead of keeping the experience private to themselves. The biggest case in
Sure.
point,
Yeah.
Katy Perry.
Okay.
You
Oh, I
know,
see where you're going.
yeah, right.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
they don't. Katy Perry doesn't want to go to space to have any private experience about space. She
No.
wants to show off that she and a couple other girlfriends,
Yeah.
you know, we're in space at all.
Yep.
Snapshot the experience.
Yep.
Maybe spend 10 seconds there. Come back down. Snapshot herself again, kissing the ground.
You see the ground.
And
Yep.
right, exactly, yeah. And
Yeah.
the irony of this thing is that I'm kind of feeding into that too by even talking about this. But
Right.
but I guess it
I'll
kind
give
of
you a
has to be
pass.
said. Yeah,
Exactly.
right,
I'll give
yeah,
you a pass on that.
right,
Yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
you know,
I was going to say,
right,
if it was me, I'd get one photo as a memento and I'd spend the rest of the time flipping and staring out the window.
right, yeah. But it's something I've kind of come to know as the overview effect. Like what real astronauts have, looking at the Earth from space and transforming your life over it. You know, Katy Perry has no overview effect that is anything meaningful to speak of.
Yeah.
Or I'm positive about that. Um, what she did was practically the equivalent of the vomit comet. So right, where you kind of go zero
Yeah.
gravity for a bit. So
For those who don't know, the Vomit Comet is a nickname for a 747. At least it was a 747 last time I checked that NASA owns. I think there are a couple of them. And in order to train people in zero G, they'll fly up in this thing and basically fly it towards the ground for about 10, 15 seconds, maybe even up to 30, and give people a short period of time when they're weightless. Otherwise, the astronauts would have no experience of weightlessness at all before they went to space. And then they have to pull up very quickly, and then they do it again over and over, and they get short periods of time when they can practice weightlessness. And they've also done experiments on the vomit comet too, but it's limited.
right, that's it. But back to my point,
Mm.
um, we can't let private experiences be destroyed by this because what pe these people are doing for clout and just showing off on Instagram and making it about um, validation from others.
Yeah,
These people are making themselves public property, and that's dangerous to the very idea of self-ownership. You will become beholden to others, and nothing will be special to you anymore, and you can't defend anything anymore because you are. in the thraldom of those that would judge you and destroy your career and your life otherwise. So, it's a stark contrast to this idea that this original virtuous idea in my mind that we do science for its own glory, for people's own takeaways and their own experiences and discoveries and kind of cementing their own meaning for their lives for themselves, So, controversies be damned, like they've done, no, these people, these men, uh, they've done something, and no one can take that away from them. And that's the gist of what I wanted to say on that.
Yeah. I mean, there have been, going back hundreds of years, there have been examples of, people monetizing stuff and wanting fame and so forth. But you're right, there's still, particularly in scientists of centuries past, there really was very much that drive to discover. Um, but yes, and a lot of them were quite, as I was saying with Darwin, a lot of them were quite fortunate that they were often or came from wealthy families. They had the time to do it as well. There were
Yeah.
people obviously who would have loved to have done that, but centuries ago who didn't have the option because they didn't have come from a family with enough wealth for them to be able to study, the
Yeah.
sciences and so forth. Whereas
Yeah.
now, of course, we've got there's more opportunity. But yes,
Yeah.
it's interesting that yeah, these men had a huge amount. I mean, Newton's a good example. I mean, he actually notoriously didn't reveal a lot of his work. In fact, he was not a very nice person, by the way. So he would actually discover something and not tell anybody, and then somebody else would discover it and publish it, and he would get really angry at them because he'd published before they did. Sorry, they published before he did. But of course, it was up to him to publish, but he didn't seem to see that as the problem. And then he was, in a few cases, I believe he proceeded to systematically destroy their careers because they had
Mm.
dared to discover something that he had also discovered.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
a
I mean,
very nice gentleman
personal
overall.
problems among scientists aside, there was
Not,
still the drive to discover, even if it
yes,
meant keeping it to yourself.
yes, exactly. That's right. But essentially, he often wasn't looking for fame because if he was, he would have published more quickly with a lot of his ideas. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, to be sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. 'Cause, the problem is, if you're really looking for fame, normally you take the easy way out on that one. Like if I'm sure if we want to be famous, we'd be feminists.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Well, do we have anything else to
No,
cover?
I'll save my talk about commercials. So next time. Oh, by the way,
Yes.
just as a heads up, so we're not like saying it at the time. The next episode is going to be in 3 weeks, not 2 weeks,
Yeah.
because I'm going to attend a show of a friend's band. It's going to be like that one other
Nice.
situation in which it's probably going to be like 3 o'clock in the morning that I'm going to get back the next day, so I will not be able to do the episode. So
Yeah.
there'll be a 3 week time span instead of two this time.
Yeah. Cool. All right. As of May 2025, a warrant is outstanding for the arrest of Zoe McClellan in relation to charges of kidnapping, child stealing, and child custody deprivation. McClellan is a public figure who has appeared in numerous popular television shows, including Star Trek Voyager, JAG, NCIS New Orleans, and Designated Survivor. Her face is familiar to millions. It is extraordinary that she has evaded detection for so long. McClellan was reportedly residing in an apartment in River Ridge, Louisiana in April 2021 and may still be residing in the area. McClellan grew up in the area of Port Orchard, Washington State, and may have returned to the area. Some sources believe that McClellan has left the United States and is residing in Canada or Costa Rica. Prior to disappearing, McClellan was known to use the alias Sarah Chandler. Anyone with any relevant information should contact the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Thank you.
All right.
See you in three
Catch you.
weeks.
Yeah, see you in 3 weeks. That was a great talk.
Yeah, wasn't it? Bye.
Yeah, bye.